I spent 25 years dreaming about my daughter's wedding day. From the moment I first held Jessica in my arms, I imagined the day I'd help her choose a dress, taste test cakes, and walk through flower-filled venues. I pictured us laughing, together as we argued over color schemes and seating arrangements. I even started a special savings account when she was just 5 years old, adding to it every month without fail, even during the years when my ex-husband's child support checks mysteriously stopped arriving. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. For 25 years, I sacrificed everything for Jessica. I worked double shifts at the hospital when she needed braces. I sold my grandmother's vintage jewelry collection to pay for her college application fees. I even passed up a promotion that would have meant relocating, because I didn't want to uproot her during her senior year of high school. Every decision I made, every dollar I saved, every dream I deferred, it was all for her. Then Jessica met Connor. His family had old money, the kind that builds university libraries and has buildings named after them. His mother, Victoria, wore pearls to breakfast and referred to her country club membership as her second religion. From the moment Jessica brought him home, I could feel Victoria sizing me up, mentally cataloging all the ways I didn't measure up to her standards. But I smiled and brought out my best serving dishes anyway, determined to make a good impression, for Jessica's sake. When Connor proposed after just 8 months of dating, I was surprised, but happy for them. Jessica called me screaming with excitement, and I cried right along with her. "Mom, I'm getting married," she squealed. "Can you believe it? I'm going to be Mrs. Connor Bradford." I immediately offered to take her venue hunting that weekend. The money I'd been saving all these years was ready and waiting. It wasn't Bradford money, but it was enough to give my daughter the wedding she deserved. "Let me talk to Connor and his mom first," Jessica said. "Victoria has a lot of connections, and she's already texting me about venues." That should have been my first warning sign. The first few weeks after Jessica's engagement were a whirlwind. I called her daily, asking when we could start touring venues together. Each time she had an excuse ready. Victoria was researching options. Connor's family had traditions to consider. They were just so busy with work. Eventually, my calls started going straight to voicemail. I finally cornered Jessica at her apartment one Sunday afternoon in May. Spring sunshine streamed through her kitchen windows as I set down the lasagna I'd brought, her favorite comfort food since childhood. "Honey, I've been thinking about the Grand Hotel for your reception," I said, pulling up photos on my phone. "Remember how you always loved their Christmas decorations when you were little? You used to say you wanted to get married there someday." Jessica didn't even glance at my phone. She was busy texting, her fingers flying across the screen. "Oh, Victoria already booked Westfield Manor for us. Connor's great-grandfather helped build it, so they're giving us a family discount." My hand, still holding my phone out, slowly lowered to the counter. "You already booked a venue?" "3 weeks ago," Jessica said, finally looking up. "Victoria has connections everywhere. You wouldn't believe the deal we got." "But I thought we were going to look at venues together. I've been saving for your wedding since you were 5 years old." My voice sounded small, even to my own ears. Jessica sighed, setting down her phone. "Mom, this is exactly why I didn't tell you. You always get so emotional about these things. Victoria knows exactly what she's doing. She's planned galas bigger than my wedding. Besides, Connor's parents are covering most of the costs anyway." "I want to contribute too," I insisted. "I have almost $50,000 saved." Jessica's eyes widened. "50,000? Mom, that's sweet, but the flowers alone are going to cost nearly that much. Victoria has already hired a designer who did Chelsea Clinton's wedding." The lasagna between us grew cold as Jessica pulled out her phone again, showing me photos of an elaborate English garden-inspired venue with marble columns and a reflecting pool. It was beautiful, yes, but nothing like the warm, intimate wedding I'd imagined for her, for us. "We've already hired the caterer, too," Jessica continued, scrolling through more photos. "And Victoria found this amazing dress designer who usually has a 3-year waiting list, but she pulled some strings." Each word felt like a small betrayal. Each decision made without me. Each memory created without my input. They all piled up like bricks, building a wall between me and the daughter I'd raised alone. "I see," I said finally. "So what's left for me to do?" Jessica brightened, as if relieved I was finally understanding. "You can help with the rehearsal dinner. Well, not plan it. Victoria's already handling that with her event coordinator. But you can help with, with what, Jessica?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "Mom, don't be like this," Jessica sighed. "It's just that Victoria knows what she's doing. Her family has been hosting society weddings for generations. Your taste is nice, but it's different." Different. The word hung in the air between us. Different meant not good enough. Different meant less than. Different meant the mother who had scraped and sacrificed for 25 years was now being sidelined because she didn't know the difference between ecru and eggshell napkins. "I understand," I said quietly, though I didn't. Not really. As I drove home that evening, tears blurred my vision so badly I had to pull over twice. The dashboard clock mockingly reminded me it was the 15th of the month, the day I normally transferred money into Jessica's wedding fund. 20 years of 15ths. 240 faithful deposits, some as small as $20 during the lean months when Jessica had needed new school shoes or when the water heater had broken. All those sacrifices, all those dreams. And Victoria Bradford had swept them aside with her manicured hands and society connections. When I finally made it home, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. If Jessica and Victoria thought I was just going to fade into the background of this wedding, they had severely underestimated the woman who had raised a daughter single-handedly while working full-time and putting herself through nursing school. I hadn't fought this hard for this long just to be dismissed as different. Part 2. The Hidden Strength. What Jessica didn't know, what she had never known, was that my savings account wasn't the only resource I had at my disposal. 20 years ago, long before Jessica had even started thinking about boys, I'd made a different kind of investment. My late father had been the groundskeeper at the Grand Hotel for 37 years. He'd trimmed the hedges, maintained the famous rose gardens, and kept the fountain flowing through droughts and blizzards. Jessica had grown up hearing stories about the hotel from her grandfather, thrilling at tales of celebrity weddings and secret garden passages. What she didn't know was that before my father passed away, the owner of the Grand, old Mr. Harrington, had pulled me aside at the funeral. "Your father saved this place more times than I can count," he'd said, pressing a small envelope into my hands. The winter of '89 when the pipes burst. The flood of '95 when he sandbagged the entire East Wing by himself. The time he caught that kitchen fire before it spread. Mr. Harrington's eyes had misted over. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Raymond never wanted recognition, but I want you to have this. Consider it a standing invitation. Inside the envelope was a simple card embossed with the Grand's logo and signed by Mr. Harrington himself. The bearer of this card is entitled, "To one event of their choosing at the Grand Hotel, to be honored in perpetuity by current and future management." I'd kept that card in my safety deposit box for 20 years, taking it out occasionally just to run my fingers over the embossed lettering. It was my ace in the hole, my gift to Jessica when the time came. The Grand Hotel typically booked weddings 3 years in advance, with a minimum expenditure that would make most parents sweat. But with this card, I could give Jessica the wedding venue of her dreams without competing with Victoria's connections or wealth. The morning after my disappointing conversation with Jessica, I called the Grand Hotel and arranged a meeting with the current events manager, Diana Chen. She was skeptical when I mentioned the card. Apparently, Mr. Harrington had made some unusual promises in his later years, but her demeanor changed completely when I produced the actual document. "This is quite extraordinary," Diana said, turning the card over in her hands. "Mr. Harrington passed away 15 years ago, but his family has always insisted we honor his personal commitments." She tapped a few keys on her computer. "So you're looking at booking the main ballroom for next June? That's our most popular month. We're fully booked already." I leaned forward. "The card says any event of my choosing. I'm choosing my daughter's wedding reception on June 12th. Diana's expression wavered between professional courtesy and genuine regret. "I understand, but we have another wedding already scheduled for that date. A very prominent family. I can offer you alternative dates." "I don't want an alternative date," I said firmly. "The card doesn't mention subject to availability. It says any event of my choosing. My father earned this." 20 minutes and one phone call to the Harrington family later, Diana returned with a tight smile. "It seems you're right, Ms. Mitchell. The Harringtons have authorized us to accommodate your request." She hesitated. "We'll need to contact the other party and explain the situation. We can offer them an alternative date or another venue within our hotel group." "Thank you," I said, feeling both victorious and slightly guilty. I wasn't normally the type to pull rank or displace someone else's plans, but something had hardened inside me since yesterday. If Victoria could use her connections to take over my daughter's wedding, I could use mine to take it back. "There's one more thing," I added as Diana prepared the preliminary paperwork. "I'd like to keep this arrangement confidential for now. My daughter is being influenced by her future mother-in-law. I'd like to surprise her with this gift when the time is right." Diana nodded, though I could see curiosity in her eyes. "Of course. We'll list the reservation under your name only, and we won't discuss it with anyone else without your permission." As I left the Grand Hotel that day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Power. I had a secret weapon, a surprise that would remind Jessica who had been there for her all along. Victoria Bradford might have her designer flowers and society connections, but I had something more meaningful, a piece of Jessica's childhood, a connection to her beloved grandfather, and a stunning venue that would make Victoria's choice look second-rate by comparison. I didn't call Jessica that evening. Instead, I poured myself another glass of wine and began making lists, guest lists, decoration ideas, menu options. For the first time since the engagement, I felt excited again. This would be my gift to Jessica. When the time was right, I would reveal that I'd secured the venue she'd dreamed about since childhood. Victoria would have no choice but to adapt her grand plans to my venue. For once, I would be calling the shots. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly things would unravel from there. Part 3. The Strategic Reveal. 3 weeks passed and Jessica still hadn't called. I tried not to dwell on it, focusing instead on my secret plans. I met with Diana Chen twice more, selecting linens and discussing menu options for a reception that Jessica didn't even know about yet. I found myself enjoying the subterfuge, imagining the look on Victoria's face when she realized her carefully orchestrated takeover had been outmaneuvered. Then came the invitation. Not a wedding invitation. That would have been too considerate. No, this was an invitation to a bridal vision luncheon at the Bradford estate, hosted by Victoria. The cream-colored card with gold embossing arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between my electric bill and a supermarket flyer as if it belonged with such ordinary correspondence. I stared at it for a full minute. A bridal luncheon that I, the mother of the bride, was being invited to rather than helping to host. The audacity was breathtaking. I called Jessica immediately. "I just received an invitation to a bridal luncheon for you," I said when she answered. "At Victoria's house." "Oh, good! It arrived!" Jessica sounded genuinely pleased. Victoria's been working so hard on it. The caterer is flying in from New York, and she's hired a string quartet for background music. Jessica, I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady, don't you think it's strange that I'm being invited to my own daughter's bridal luncheon? Shouldn't I be co-hosting it with Victoria? The silence on the other end was brief, but telling. Mom, Victoria has connections. With all these amazing vendors, she knows exactly how these things should be done. I didn't want you to feel pressured or overwhelmed. Overwhelmed by helping to plan my only child's wedding? The wedding I've been saving for since you were in kindergarten? The hurt was transforming into anger now, hot and clarifying. That's not what I meant, Jessica said quickly. It's just, Victoria moves in these social circles. She knows all the right people. I don't want you to feel out of place. Out of place. At my daughter's wedding events. The word stung like a physical slap. I see, I said, my voice suddenly calm. And what role do you see me playing in your wedding, Jessica? Quiet observer? Supportive background character? Mom, please don't make this difficult. Just come to the luncheon. Wear something nice. Victoria mentioned the photographer from Town and Country will be there. I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. Actually, honey, I've been meaning to tell you. I've got a surprise for you. I've secured the Grand Hotel for your reception. Remember how you always talked about getting married there? I called in a favor, and they're giving us June 12th. We just need to cancel that other venue Victoria booked. The silence that followed was absolute. I could practically hear Jessica's thoughts racing, trying to process this unexpected development. You. What? She finally managed. Mom, you can't be serious. We've already sent out save the dates with Westfield Manor listed. Victoria's cousin is on their board of directors. She pulled major strings to get us that date. Well, I pulled a few strings of my own, I replied, unable to keep a note of triumph from my voice. The Grand Hotel has special meaning for our family. Your grandfather worked there for almost 4 decades. They've given us their best ballroom as a gesture of respect. To him. Isn't that wonderful? Mom, Jessica's voice had taken on an alarming quality, something between panic and rage. You need to cancel that reservation immediately. We're not changing venues. Victoria has already hired the florist, the caterer. Everything is coordinated, specifically for Westfield Manor. The vendors can adjust, I said dismissively. The Grand is a much better venue anyway. The gardens are perfect for photography, and the ballroom ceiling has those crystal chandeliers you always loved. I don't care about chandeliers, Jessica exploded. This isn't about what I wanted when I was 10 years old. This is about my wedding, my actual wedding happening in 5 months, and you're trying to hijack it. Hijack it? I repeated incredulously. That's rich coming from the daughter who's let her future mother-in-law plan every detail without so much as consulting. Me! Because Victoria knows what she's doing, Jessica shot back. She's not trying to turn my wedding into some nostalgic tribute to my childhood. She's helping me create the sophisticated event Connor and I actually want. The words hit me, like physical blows. Sophisticated. Actually want. The implication was clear. My vision for her wedding was childish, unsophisticated, unwanted. I see, I said, my voice going very quiet. So the Grand Hotel isn't good enough for the new Jessica. The one who's marrying into the Bradford family. That's not what I said. Jessica sounded exhausted now. Look, I appreciate the gesture, I really do. But you need to cancel that reservation. We're getting married at Westfield Manor. End of discussion. We'll see about that, I said and hung up. Within 30 minutes, my phone was blowing up with texts and calls. First from Jessica, then from numbers I didn't recognize. Victoria, probably, and who knew who else from the Bradford contingent. I silenced my phone and poured myself a generous glass of wine. Let them panic. Let them scramble. For once, I wasn't going to back down quietly. Part 4. The Counterattack and Truth Cascade. The next morning, I awoke to 17 missed calls and 32 text messages. I scrolled through them as I sipped my coffee. From Jessica. Mom, please call me back. You're being ridiculous. From Jessica. Victoria is furious. She's talking about canceling the entire wedding. From Jessica. Connor says you're trying to sabotage our relationship. Is that what you want? From unknown numbers. This is Victoria Bradford. Call me immediately. To discuss your inappropriate behavior. Diana Chen from the Grand Hotel here. Mrs. Bradford has contacted us regarding your reservation. Please call when convenient. This is Edward Bradford, Connor's father. We need to resolve this situation like adults. I deleted them all and drove to work, where I spent 12 hours focused on my patients rather than my personal drama. Hospital work had always been my sanctuary, the place where I was valued for my skills and experience, not judged for my lack of social connections or designer clothing. When I returned home that evening, there was a black Mercedes parked in my driveway. Victoria Bradford stood on my porch, a designer handbag hanging from her elbow, her pearl necklace gleaming. In the porch light. Eleanor, she said with a tight smile as I approached. I think it's time we had a chat, woman to woman. I considered telling her to leave, but curiosity won out. Come in, I said, unlocking my front door. My modest 3-bedroom house felt suddenly shabby under Victoria's appraising gaze. I watched her eyes catalog everything, the slightly worn sofa, the outdated kitchen cabinets, the family photos covering the walls. Tea? I offered, mostly to break the tension. No, thank you, Victoria said, perching on the edge of my sofa, as if afraid it might soil her cream-colored pantsuit. I'll get straight to the point. This venue situation needs to be resolved immediately. Jessica is devastated. Is she? I asked, remaining standing. Or are you devastated? Victoria's perfectly arched eyebrows rose slightly. I understand you're feeling marginalized in the wedding planning. That's natural for mothers of the bride. But causing this kind of disruption isn't helping anyone, least of all Jessica. I've been saving for Jessica's wedding for 20 years, I said. I've been dreaming about helping her plan it for just as long. And then you swept in and took over everything. The venue, the dress, the flowers, even the rehearsal dinner. What exactly was I supposed to do? Sit quietly in the corner and just be grateful for an invitation? Eleanor, Victoria said, her voice taking on a condescending tone that made my teeth clench. Wedding planning is complex. It requires connections, experience, and a certain aesthetic sensibility. Connor's family has expectations. There are traditions to uphold, social considerations. Social considerations, I repeated flatly. You mean I'm not good enough for your family? Victoria sighed dramatically. This isn't about you. It's about giving Jessica and Connor the wedding they deserve. The wedding that reflects their future, not your past. Something snapped inside me. Get out, I said quietly. Excuse me? Get out of my house. My voice was deadly calm. You've made it abundantly clear what you think. Of me. Now I'm making it clear what I think of you. You're a snob, Victoria. You took advantage of a young woman's insecurities to push her mother out of one of the most important days of her life. You didn't do it for Jessica. You did it for yourself, to control the narrative, to make sure everything fit your precious aesthetic sensibility. Victoria stood up, clutching her handbag like a shield. I should have known this would be unproductive. If you won't be reasonable, then perhaps it's best if you don't attend the wedding at all. I'll speak with Jessica. You do that, I said, holding the door open. And while you're at it, explain to her why the Grand Hotel suddenly won't return her calls about booking her wedding. Victoria froze. What are you talking about? I smiled thinly. I may not have your social connections, Victoria, but I have something more valuable at the Grand. I have history. My father worked there for nearly 4 decades. The owners owe me a favor, a big one. And they've chosen to honor that debt by giving me exclusive rights to June 12th. No amount of Bradford money or influence is going to change that. Victoria's face flushed with anger. You're bluffing. Call them, I challenged. Ask for Diana Chen. She'll confirm that the Grand Hotel will be ready to host Jessica's wedding on June 12th, but only under my name, not yours. The venue is mine, Victoria. I chose it because Jessica loved it as a child, because it has meaning for our family, because it represents everything you've tried to erase from this wedding. Jessica's history, my contribution, our relationship before the Bradfords came along. For once, Victoria seemed speechless. She opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and walked stiffly to her car without another word. I expected the full Bradford artillery to be deployed against me after that confrontation. Instead, what happened the next day caught me completely off guard. Jessica showed up at my door at 7 a.m., still in her pajamas, eyes red and puffy from crying. You were right, she said the moment I opened the door. Victoria's been controlling everything. Last night after she came back from your house, she called me and said you were becoming a problem and suggested we might need to reconsider your role in the wedding. She actually used the phrase, minimized presence. About my own mother. She collapsed into my arms, sobbing against my shoulder like she used to do as a little girl. I guided her to the sofa, wrapping her in the throw blanket we'd picked out together years ago. I've been so stupid, Mom, Jessica hiccuped between sobs. I let Victoria take over because I wanted Connor's family to accept me. I was so scared of not being good enough for them that I pushed you away. The one person who's always thought I was more than enough. I stroked her hair, my anger dissolving at the sight of her genuine distress. It's okay, honey. Wedding planning makes everyone a little crazy. It's not okay, Jessica insisted, wiping her eyes. Victoria's been making decisions without even asking what I want. She chose Westfield Manor because Connor's second cousin had her debut there in 1992, not because it means anything to us. The dress she picked makes me look like a cupcake. The florist she hired is doing all white flowers because color is tacky. She looked up at me, her eyes still swimming with tears. Can we really get the Grand Hotel for the reception? I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. Your grandfather made sure of it. He loved that place almost as much as he loved you. Jessica squeezed my hand. Tell me about the Grand again. About Grandpa Ray and the secret garden passages. So I did. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting warm golden light across my living room, I told Jessica all the stories she'd loved as a child, about her grandfather's adventures at the Grand, about the celebrity weddings he'd helped prepare for, about the time he'd saved a bride's veil from blowing into the fountain. That's the wedding I want, Jessica said finally. One with real stories behind it. One that means something. Part 5. The Transformed Future. The next 3 months were a whirlwind of reclamations. Jessica called Victoria that same morning and firmly but politely informed her that the wedding would be moving to the Grand Hotel. Victoria protested. Of course, there were deposits that couldn't be refunded, vendors who couldn't relocate, traditions that couldn't be broken. But Jessica stood her ground, supported by Connor who, to his credit, recognized how his mother had overstepped. It's our wedding, he told Victoria when she attempted to enlist his support. And the Grand is where Jessica wants to have it. That's all that matters to me. Victoria eventually backed down, though not without extracting certain concessions. She would still handle the rehearsal dinner, still have input on the guest list, still expect certain Bradford traditions to be honored. But the wedding itself, the venue, the flowers, the cake, the music, that belonged to Jessica again, and to me, as her mother and co-planner. We spent weekends visiting the Grand together, Jessica and I. Sometimes Connor joined us, sometimes not. We walked the gardens where her grandfather had once tended roses, explored the ballroom where chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across the marble floor, and sat in the courtyard cafe planning seating arrangements and menu selections. Diana Chen became our ally and friend, sharing stories about my father that even I hadn't heard. How he'd planted a special rose bush when Diana's first child was born. How he'd kept a notebook of every bride's favorite flower so he could make sure it was blooming somewhere on the property for their anniversary visits. Your dad understood that a wedding isn't just about one day, Diana told us over coffee one afternoon. It's about creating a place where memories can take root and grow. Jessica's eyes had filled with tears at that. That's exactly what Mom's been trying to tell me all along. The wedding itself was magnificent, more beautiful than anything Victoria could have orchestrated because it was infused with meaning at every turn. Jessica walked down an aisle strewn with petals from the same rose varieties her grandfather had planted decades earlier. The reception took place in a ballroom where her 5-year-old handprints were secretly preserved in a cornerstone, placed there during a renovation when my father had brought her to inspect his workplace. Victoria attended, of course, elegant in designer silk and family pearls. She was polite, if somewhat reserved, but something had shifted in our dynamic. She regarded me with a new respect, not because I'd outmaneuvered her, but because she'd finally understood what Jessica had always known. That love and devotion aren't measured in social connections or brand names, but in years of sacrifice and in stories that bind generations together. After the cake was cut and the first dances completed, I found myself alone for a moment on the terrace overlooking the gardens my father had tended for so many years. The night air was perfumed with roses, and the sounds of celebration drifted through the open doors behind me. Jessica found me there, radiant in her wedding dress, not Victoria's choice, but a simpler, more elegant gown we'd discovered together at a small boutique. "Thank you, Mom," she said, linking her arm through mine, "for not giving up on me, for fighting for us, even when I was too blinded by Bradford glamour to see what I was losing." I squeezed her hand. "I'll always fight for you, Jessica. That's what mothers do." She leaned her head on my shoulder, just as she used to do when she was small. "I know that now. I really do." We stood together in comfortable silence, watching the garden lights illuminate pathways my father had designed, surrounded by flowers he had planted. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of rightness, as if all the sacrifice, all the hurt, all the struggle had been leading to this precise point of completion. Victoria appeared in the doorway, hesitating when she saw us together. For a moment, I thought she might turn away. Instead, she approached slowly, something like humility in her usually confident stride. "The photographer is asking for the mothers of the bride and groom," she said. Then, with visible effort, "You've created something very special here, Eleanor. Jessica is lucky to have you." It wasn't an apology. Victoria Bradford probably didn't have that word in her vocabulary, but it was an acknowledgement, and for now, that was enough. As the three of us walked back inside together, I realized that sometimes the greatest victory isn't in defeating your opponent, but in transforming the battlefield entirely, turning competition into cooperation, resentment into respect, exclusion into belonging. The venue I had secretly reserved hadn't just secured my place in my daughter's wedding. It had secured my place in her life, reminding both of us that the bonds between mother and daughter, though sometimes stretched by circumstance or tested by outside influences, are ultimately strengthened by the truth of shared history and the power of unwavering love. The bridal luncheon at the Bradford estate was exactly as ostentatious as I'd imagined. Ivory tablecloths draped over a dozen round tables scattered across Victoria's immaculate garden. Centerpieces of white orchids and pale blue hydrangeas towered, Above bone china place settings. A string quartet played softly from a small gazebo, their melodies drifting through the perfumed air. Everything screamed old money and impeccable taste, Victoria's signature. I arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in the most expensive outfit I owned, a pale blue suit I'd splurged on for my hospital's fundraising gala last year. As I approached the entrance, I could see Victoria directing staff, pointing imperiously at various details that apparently didn't meet her exacting standards. "The napkins need to be refolded. Those aren't proper bishop's folds," she was saying to a harried-looking server. "And those water glasses need to be moved precisely 2 inches to the right of each setting." Jessica stood nearby, looking uncomfortable in a white sundress that seemed to have been selected more for Victoria's approval than her own comfort. When she spotted me, relief flooded her face. "Mom, thank goodness you're here." She hurried over, embracing me with unexpected fervor. Up close, I could see the shadows under her eyes, poorly concealed with expensive makeup. "Everything looks beautiful," I said, trying to mean it. The setup was objectively stunning, but it felt sterile, more like a museum exhibition than a celebration of my daughter's impending marriage. Jessica's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Victoria's been working on it all week. The florist had to redo the centerpieces twice because the first ones weren't Bradford standard, whatever that means." Victoria materialized beside us, champagne flute in one manicured hand. "Eleanor, how nice of you to join us. I wasn't sure you would after our conversation." Her eyes flicked dismissively over my outfit before returning to my face with a practiced smile. "I wouldn't miss my daughter's bridal luncheon," I replied evenly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Of course not," Victoria said. "Though I understand you've been quite busy making alternative arrangements." Before I could respond, guests began arriving, a parade of women in designer dresses and statement jewelry. Jessica was immediately swept away to greet Connor's aunts, cousins, and family friends. I found myself alone, clutching a mimosa and trying not to feel like an interloper at my own daughter's celebration. I was midway through an awkward conversation with Connor's great-aunt Judith about hospital administration when Victoria clinked her glass for attention. The garden fell silent as she took position at the head table, her pearl necklace catching the sunlight. "Ladies, thank you for coming to celebrate our dear Jessica," Victoria began, her voice carrying effortlessly across the garden. "As you know, joining the Bradford family comes with certain traditions, expectations, and," she paused for effect, "responsibilities." Several women nodded knowingly. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. "Jessica has already shown such grace in embracing our ways," Victoria continued. "Westfield Manor has hosted Bradford celebrations for 4 generations, and next June, Jessica and Connor will add their union to that distinguished history." My fingers tightened around my glass. She was deliberately bringing up Westfield Manor, knowing full well about my reservation at the Grand. "A toast," Victoria concluded, raising her glass, "to Jessica, soon to be the newest Bradford bride." Everyone raised their glasses. I did too, but my eyes remained fixed on Victoria. This wasn't just a bridal luncheon. It was a power play, a public staking of claim. Jessica wasn't just marrying Connor. In Victoria's mind, she was being absorbed into the Bradford dynasty. Throughout lunch, I was seated far from Jessica at a table with distant Bradford relatives who spoke primarily about people and places I'd never heard of. I pushed salmon mousse around my plate and smiled politely at references to vacation homes in Newport and family connections to minor European royalty. When the dessert course arrived, individual lemon soufflés that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, Victoria stood again, this time with a large leather-bound album in her arms. "Ladies, I'd like to share something special," she announced. "The Bradford Wedding Album. Every Bradford bride for the past century has worn pieces from our family collection on her wedding day." Victoria opened the album to reveal photographs of stern-looking women in vintage wedding attire. With each turn of the page, she pointed out specific items: a pearl tiara, a lace veil, a sapphire brooch that had been passed down through generations. "And Jessica," Victoria said, her voice ringing with false warmth, "has agreed to continue this beautiful tradition by wearing the Bradford Pearl Suite for her ceremony at Westfield." All eyes turned to Jessica, who managed a small nod and smile that didn't reach her eyes. I could see it now. The invisible chains Victoria was wrapping around my daughter, link by link, disguised as tradition and privilege. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment away from the suffocating atmosphere of Bradford superiority. Inside the marble-countered powder room, I leaned against the sink and took several deep breaths. This wasn't just about a wedding venue anymore. It was about Jessica's identity, her future, her very sense of self. When I returned to the garden, gift opening had begun. Jessica sat in a flower-adorned chair, surrounded by elegantly wrapped packages. Victoria stood beside her, a small notebook in hand to record each gift and giver, no doubt for the precisely worded thank you notes she would later dictate. I watched as Jessica unwrapped monogrammed linens, crystal vases, and silver picture frames, all selected from the Bradford-approved registry Victoria had created. My own gift, a handmade quilt I'd commissioned from Jessica's favorite local artist, sat unopened at the bottom of the pile. When the luncheon finally concluded, I found Jessica alone for a moment near the garden entrance. "Are you okay?" I asked quietly, noticing the tight line of her shoulders under her pristine white dress. "I'm fine," she said automatically, then glanced around to ensure no one was within earshot. "It's just intense. Victoria has opinions about everything, from the shade of my nail polish to which fork I use first." I squeezed her hand. "You know, it's still your wedding. You're allowed to have opinions too." Jessica's eyes darted toward Victoria, who was instructing servers on the proper way to package leftover cake. "It's easier to just go along with her ideas. She gets so disappointed when things don't go exactly her way." "And what about you?" I asked. "Are you disappointed?" Jessica bit her lip. "I just want everyone to be happy." "Including yourself?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. As I drove home from the Bradford estate, I tried to make sense of what I'd witnessed. The Jessica I'd raised had been spirited, opinionated, fiercely independent. The young woman at that luncheon seemed diminished somehow, as if Victoria's overbearing presence was slowly erasing the vibrant personality I'd nurtured for 25 years. I thought again about the Grand Hotel, about the reservation I'd made using my father's legacy. Was I any better than Victoria, imposing my vision on Jessica's wedding? The difference, I told myself, was meaning. The Grand represented family, history, genuine sentiment, a place Jessica had genuinely loved. Westfield Manor was just another status symbol in Victoria's collection. When I arrived home, I found Jessica sitting on my porch steps, still in her white sundress from the luncheon. "What are you doing here?" I asked, surprised to see her. "I thought you were having dinner with Connor's family tonight." "I told them I wasn't feeling well," she said, standing to hug me. "Can we talk? About the venue situation?" My heart sank. Had Victoria sent her to convince me to back down? We went inside, and Jessica kicked off her heels with a sigh of relief, curling up on my sofa like she used to do as a teenager. "That luncheon was exhausting," she admitted. "Victoria insisted I write down what everyone wore, so I don't commit the unforgivable sin of complimenting someone on a dress they've already worn to a previous Bradford event." I smiled despite myself. Heaven forbid. Jessica twisted her engagement ring, a massive diamond surrounded by sapphires that had once belonged to Connor's grandmother. "Mom, about the Grand Hotel. I've been thinking, Can you show me the place again? Before I make a final decision? Hope fluttered in my chest. Of course, we can go tomorrow if you'd like. The next morning, Jessica arrived dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, a stark contrast to the polished, Bradford-approved wardrobe she'd been sporting lately. We drove to the Grand in comfortable silence, the radio playing softly in the background. The hotel looked even more magnificent in the clear morning light, its limestone facade gleaming, the famous gardens bursting with early summer blooms. Diana Chen met us in the lobby, her professional demeanor softening when she recognized me. "Eleanor, lovely to see you again," she said warmly before turning to Jessica. "And you must be the bride. Your mother has told me so much about you." "This place is even more beautiful than I remembered," Jessica said, gazing up at the ornate ceiling of the main lobby. Diana led us through the hotel, pointing out architectural details and sharing historical anecdotes. Jessica grew more animated, with each room we visited, asking questions about lighting options and acoustics. When we reached the main ballroom, the crown jewel of the Grand, she fell silent, taking in the soaring ceilings, the wall of windows overlooking the rose garden, and the magnificent crystal chandeliers. "This is where Dad proposed to you, isn't it?" she asked quietly. I nodded, surprised she remembered that detail from my stories. Right under the central chandelier. He was so nervous he dropped the ring and had to get down on his hands and knees to find it. Jessica laughed, a genuine, unrestrained sound I hadn't heard in months. "And Grandpa Ray was watching from behind that pillar, right? Because he'd helped Dad set everything up." "That's right," I said, warmth spreading. Threw me at the memory. "Your grandfather strung white lights all along that balcony. He said he wanted the ceiling to look like stars." Diana excused herself to take a call, leaving us alone in the vast, empty ballroom. Jessica walked to the center of the polished floor, turning slowly to take in the space from every angle. "I remember coming here for your hospital's Christmas party when I was little," she said. "I told everyone my grandpa built this place, and you had to explain that he just took care of the gardens." I smiled at the memory. "You were so proud of him." "I still am," Jessica said softly. Then, with sudden decisiveness, "This is where I want to get married, Mom. Not Westfield Manor. Here, where there's actual family history, not just Bradford tradition." Joy surged through me, quickly tempered by caution. "Are you sure? What about Victoria's plans? The vendors she's already booked?" Jessica's expression hardened slightly. "Victoria will have to adjust. It's my wedding, not hers." She took a deep breath. "I've been letting her make all these decisions because it seemed easier than fighting, but I'm not happy with most of them. The dress she chose is nothing like what I wanted. The flowers are all wrong. Even the music she selected. It's all Bach and Vivaldi, when Connor and I wanted something more contemporary. I wanted to punch the air in triumph but kept my expression neutral." "Have you talked to Connor about this?" "Last night," Jessica nodded. "After I left your place, I went to his apartment and laid everything out. How unhappy I've been with the planning process, how Victoria has steamrolled over every idea I've had." She smiled, a hint of her old confidence returning. He was actually relieved. Apparently, he hates Westfield Manor. Says it reminds him of boring family functions where he had to wear uncomfortable suits and wasn't allowed to touch anything. And he's okay with changing venues? Even with save the dates already sent? Jessica nodded firmly. "He said he wants me to be happy, and if that means making some changes and dealing with his mother's disappointment, then that's what we'll do." She reached for my hand. "I'd like you to help me plan the wedding. The real wedding. The one Connor and I actually want, not the one Victoria has been designing." I squeezed her fingers, overcome with emotion. "I'd be honored." Diana returned, tablet in hand. "So, what do we think of the ballroom? Is it still a contender?" "It's not a contender," Jessica said, then broke into a wide smile. "It's the winner, We're booking the grand for the wedding and reception. Diana beamed. Wonderful. Let's go to my office and discuss the details. As we followed Diana through the hotel corridors, Jessica linked her arm through mine. Thank you, she whispered, for not giving up on me, even when I was being an idiot. You weren't being an idiot, I assured her. Victoria Bradford is an overwhelming force of nature, and you were trying to fit into Connor's world. I don't want to fit into anyone's world, Jessica said with renewed conviction. I want to create my own, with Connor, with you, with the people who actually care about what I want, not just how things look to society. The meeting with Diana went smoothly. We secured the June 12th date, discussed catering options, and began planning the layout for both ceremony and reception. Jessica was engaged and decisive, confidently expressing preferences that had been silenced under Victoria's influence. As we left the grand, Jessica looked lighter, more like herself. Victoria's going to have a meltdown when I tell her, she said, but she didn't sound worried, just resigned to an unpleasant but necessary conversation. Would you like me to be there when you tell her? I offered. Jessica considered this, then shook her head. No, this is something I need to do myself. Besides, Connor said he'd back me up. He's meeting me at his parents' house in an hour. I hugged her goodbye in the parking lot, feeling proud of the strong, self-assured woman she had always been beneath the veneer of Bradford-approved docility. Call me afterward, I said. No matter how it goes. I will, she promised. And, Mom? I was thinking, would you like to go dress shopping next weekend? Just the two of us? The simple question brought tears to my eyes. I'd love nothing more. After Jessica left, I didn't immediately drive home. Instead, I walked through the Grand's famous rose gardens, breathing in the fragrance of flowers my father had tended decades ago. Small plaques identified each variety: Moonlight Sonata, Peace, Julia's Rose, all selections he had personally cultivated over his long career. Near the central fountain, I found the Queen Elizabeth rose bush my father had planted the year Jessica was born. Its deep pink blooms were just beginning to open, reaching toward the sunlight with the same determined grace I'd seen in my daughter that morning. I sat on a nearby bench, overcome with memories and gratitude. Whatever happened with Victoria Bradford, whatever drama might still unfold, I had reconnected with my daughter in a fundamental way. The wedding would take place at the Grand, surrounded by my father's roses and family memories that transcended Bradford tradition. My phone rang shortly after 6 p.m. I braced myself when I saw Jessica's name, expecting tales of Victoria's outrage and manipulative tactics. How did it go? I asked, cautiously. It was. Jessica paused, sounding bewildered. Weird. Not at all what I expected. Tell me everything, I said, settling deeper into my sofa. Connor and I arrived together, united front and all that, Jessica began. Victoria and Edward were having drinks on the terrace. We announced that we'd made a decision about the venue, that we were moving the wedding to the Grand Hotel. And? I prompted when she fell silent. Victoria just nodded. She said, I suspected as much after Eleanor mentioned it during our chat. Then she took a sip of her martini and asked if we'd considered how to inform the guests about the change of venue. I frowned, confused by this uncharacteristic reasonableness. That's it? No arguments? No guilt trips? Oh, she got in a few subtle digs, Jessica clarified. Something about how the Grand was charming in a vintage way, and how she supposed family sentiment trumps practical considerations sometimes. But overall, she was surprisingly accommodating. That doesn't sound like the Victoria Bradford I've come to know, I said suspiciously. Right? Jessica agreed. That's what I thought too. But then after dinner, when Connor was talking to his dad about some work thing, Victoria pulled me aside. And Mom, she apologized. She what? I nearly dropped my phone. Well, in her way, Jessica amended. She said she realized she'd been, perhaps overly directive in the wedding planning. That she'd gotten carried away with creating the perfect Bradford event and hadn't considered that Connor and I might have our own vision. I was speechless. Victoria Bradford admitting she'd overstepped? It seemed too good to be true. There's more? Jessica continued. She offered to help coordinate with all the vendors about the venue change. Said she'd personally call the Westfield board to explain the situation and see about transferring our deposit to another event. Then she asked if I'd like her to speak with Diana Chen about accommodating some of the design elements we'd already planned. I don't understand, I said slowly. What happened to transform Victoria from wedding dictator to supportive mother-in-law overnight? Jessica laughed softly. That's the weird part. Before we left, Edward pulled Connor aside, and I overheard him say something about Victoria's sister showing up at their country club luncheon and making a scene. Apparently, Victoria's been doing the exact same thing to her sister that she's been doing to me, taking over her daughter's college graduation party planning and turning it into a Bradford showcase. Ah, I said, understanding dawning. Victoria got a taste of her own medicine. I think so, Jessica agreed. Edward mentioned something about Victoria's sister using the phrase controlling nightmare in front of all their friends. Victoria looked pretty shaken by it. I couldn't help but smile at the image of Victoria Bradford being publicly called out by her own sister. Perhaps that explained her uncharacteristic capitulation regarding the venue change. So what happens now? I asked. Well, Victoria's still going to be involved, Jessica said pragmatically. She has connections we could use, and she does have a good eye for detail. But I made it clear that Connor and I have final say on everything. The grand is non-negotiable, and so is my dress choice, the music selection, and the menu. And she agreed to all that? She did, Jessica confirmed, sounding as surprised as I felt. Oh, and she asked if you'd be willing to meet with her tomorrow to discuss collaborative approaches to the planning process. I nearly choked. She wants to collaborate? With me? Those were her exact words, Jessica said, amusement evident in her voice. I told her I'd ask you. So, will you meet with her? Part of me wanted to refuse on principle, to savor my victory without offering an olive branch to the woman who had systematically excluded me from my daughter's wedding planning. But a larger part, the part that wanted Jessica's happiness above all else, recognized that ongoing hostility between her mother and future mother-in-law would only cause more stress. I'll meet with her, I said finally, but on neutral ground, not at her estate. She suggested tea at the Grand, actually, Jessica said it would give her a chance to see the space through fresh eyes. I agreed to the meeting, though not without reservations. Victoria Bradford's sudden about-face seemed too convenient, too perfectly timed, but for Jessica's sake, I was willing to attempt civility. The following afternoon, I arrived at the Grand Hotel 15 minutes early, determined to establish myself as the host of this particular summit. I secured a table in the garden terrace overlooking my father's beloved rose beds and ordered a pot of Earl Grey. My choice, my territory, my terms. Victoria arrived precisely on time, dressed in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She carried a sleek leather portfolio and a small gift bag with the Grand's logo. Eleanor, she greeted me with a nod that wasn't quite warm but lacked her usual condescension. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Jessica thought it would be helpful, I replied neutrally, pouring tea for us both. Victoria set the gift bag on the table between us. A small token, she said, for the misunderstandings between us. Cautiously, I opened the bag and removed a slender box. Inside was an antique silver letter opener, engraved with the Grand Hotel's original logo from the 1920s. It belonged to my grandfather, Victoria explained. He was on the original investment. Bored when the Grand was renovated after the war. I thought you might appreciate the connection, given your father's long service here. The gesture was unexpected and, I had to admit, thoughtful. Victoria Bradford had actually done research on something I might value, rather than selecting a gift that reflected her own preferences. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched by the history of the piece. It's beautiful. Victoria nodded, accepting my gratitude with unexpected grace. Then she opened her portfolio, revealing meticulously organized sections labeled with different aspects of wedding planning. I've taken the liberty of creating a consolidated planning document, she said, all business now. I've noted which elements need to be reconsidered for the Grand versus Westfield, which vendors can easily transfer their services to the new venue, and which will need to be replaced. I leaned forward, examining her notes with professional appreciation. Whatever else one might say about Victoria Bradford, she was impressively organized. I've also drafted a venue change announcement to send to guests, she continued, sliding a printed card across the table. I thought we could review it together to ensure it reflects both families' perspectives appropriately. The card was elegant but not ostentatious, explaining the venue change in terms that emphasized Jessica and Connor's personal connection to the Grand Hotel, without any hint that the original choice had been Victoria's rather than the couple's. This is very well done, I admitted. Victoria took a sip of tea. I owe you an apology, Eleanor. I nearly dropped my cup. I'm sorry? An apology, she repeated, looking distinctly uncomfortable. I've been overzealous in my involvement with Jessica and Connor's wedding planning. My sister made that abundantly clear yesterday at the club, in front of half of Greenwich society. Ah, there it was. The real reason for this sudden change of heart. Public embarrassment was apparently Victoria Bradford's kryptonite. Your sister sounds formidable, I observed neutrally. A flicker of something like amusement crossed Victoria's face. Cynthia has never been one to mince words. She called me a wedding hijacking control freak and suggested I seek therapy for my pathological need to manage everyone around me. Victoria grimaced at the memory. It was illuminating, to say the least. Family has a way of holding up uncomfortable mirrors, I agreed, thinking of my own confrontations with Jessica. Victoria sighed, setting down her teacup with precision. The truth is, I've been planning Bradford weddings for decades. My own, my brother's, various cousins. It's become somewhat of a role I play. The family representative ensuring everything meets Bradford standards. Standards can be important, I acknowledged cautiously. But so is recognizing when they're not the only consideration. Indeed. Victoria straightened her already impeccable posture. Jessica is not what I expected when Connor brought her home. She's more independent, more opinionated than the typical Bradford spouse. She's my daughter, I said simply. Yes, Victoria agreed. I see that now. And I realize I've been attempting to remake her into something more familiar, more controllable. It wasn't conscious, but it wasn't fair either, to her or to you. I studied Victoria's face, looking for signs of insincerity or manipulation. To my surprise, I found none, only the slightly pained expression of a proud woman forcing herself to acknowledge error. I appreciate your honesty, I said finally, and I recognize that I've been defensive about my role in Jessica's wedding. The venue was my way of reclaiming some control. A clever strategy, Victoria admitted, the ghost of a smile playing at her lips. Utilizing your father's connection to secure the Grand was quite the chess move, Eleanor. I underestimated you. Coming from Victoria, this was high praise indeed. I found myself smiling back, a tentative truce forming between us. So where do we go from here? I asked. Victoria tapped the portfolio. I propose a division of labor. Areas where each of us can contribute our particular strengths to creating the wedding Jessica and Connor actually want. We spent the next hour doing exactly that, identifying aspects of the wedding where Victoria's social connections and aesthetic expertise would be valuable, and areas where my knowledge of Jessica's preferences and family traditions would take precedence. The Grand would house both ceremony and reception, but Victoria would coordinate with Westfield Manor about hosting the rehearsal dinner, a compromise that allowed her to maintain some connection to the venue she'd originally selected. By the time we finished our second pot of tea, we had a comprehensive plan that genuinely seemed to respect both families' contributions. It wasn't perfect harmony. Victoria couldn't help making subtle digs about budget constraints, and I occasionally had to firmly redirect her more extravagant suggestions, but it was workable. As Victoria gathered her materials to leave, she paused, her expression suddenly uncertain. "There's one more thing, Eleanor. About Jessica's dress." I tensed, prepared for a battle. The wedding dress had been one of Victoria's most heavy-handed interventions, a massive ball gown with a 10-foot train that Jessica had described as a meringue explosion. "What about it?" I asked cautiously. "She doesn't like it," Victoria said bluntly. "I can see that now. Would you? Would you help her find something she actually wants to wear? Something that reflects her personality, not Bradford tradition?" The request was so unexpected, so contrary to everything Victoria had previously insisted upon, that I was momentarily speechless. "I've already spoken with the designer about releasing the deposit," Victoria continued into my silence. "It's not fair to make Jessica wear a dress she doesn't love on her wedding day, no matter how many Bradford brides have worn similar styles." "I'd be happy to help her," I managed finally. "We're actually planning to go shopping this weekend." Victoria nodded, then hesitated again. "Would it be entirely inappropriate if I joined you? Not to take over," she added quickly, seeing my expression. "Just to observe, to better understand Jessica's taste." I considered refusing. This dress shopping trip represented exactly the kind of mother-daughter bonding experience Victoria had previously denied me. But the uncertain look in her eyes, so at odds with her usual confidence, gave me pause. "I'll ask Jessica," I said, neither agreeing nor refusing outright. "It's her decision." "Of course," Victoria agreed immediately. "As it should be." We parted with a formal handshake that nevertheless felt like significant progress from our previous animosity. As I watched Victoria's sleek car pull away from the Grand's entrance, I marveled at the unexpected turns this wedding journey had taken. When I called Jessica to report on the meeting, she was equally astonished by Victoria's transformation. "She actually suggested you help me find a different dress?" Jessica asked incredulously. "The Bradford ball gown was non-negotiable last week. She literally said it was the cornerstone of Bradford bridal tradition." People can surprise you," I said, still processing the change myself. "Oh, and she asked if she could join our dress shopping trip this weekend." "Wow." Jessica fell silent for a moment. "What did you tell her?" "That it was your decision," I replied honestly. "This is your wedding dress, Jessica. You get to decide who's part of that experience." Jessica sighed thoughtfully. "You know what? Let's invite her. But let's make it clear. I'm choosing my own dress this time. No pressure, no Bradford traditions, just what makes me feel beautiful." "Are you sure?" I asked, surprised by her willingness to include Victoria after everything that had happened. "I'm marrying into her family, Mom," Jessica said pragmatically. "Connor and I will be dealing with Victoria for decades to come. If she's genuinely trying to change her approach, I think we should encourage that." I couldn't argue with Jessica's wisdom. The wedding was important, but the relationships being formed would last far longer than a single day of celebration. That Saturday, Victoria met us at a small boutique I'd selected. Not the high-end designer salon where she'd previously taken Jessica, but a respected local shop known for their personalized service and diverse selection of styles. To my surprise, Victoria arrived without her usual entourage, dressed more casually than I'd ever seen her in slacks and a simple blouse. She greeted us both with a tentative smile that revealed genuine effort to moderate her naturally commanding presence. "Thank you for including me," she said softly to Jessica. "I promise to be on my best behavior." Jessica squeezed her future mother-in-law's hand. "I appreciate you being here, Victoria. I know how much Bradford traditions mean to you." "Some traditions deserve to be reconsidered," Victoria replied, with a self-awareness I wouldn't have believed possible a week earlier. "This is your day, Jessica. Your dress should make you feel like yourself, not like you're wearing a Bradford costume." The boutique owner, Sophia, welcomed us warmly and led Jessica to a private dressing area, while Victoria and I settled into comfortable chairs with champagne flutes in hand. "No Bradford ball gown here," Victoria murmured, surveying the salon's selection of sleeker, more modern dresses. "Does that bother you?" I asked curiously. Victoria considered the question seriously. "A week ago, absolutely. Today, I'm trying to expand my perspective." When Jessica emerged in the first dress, a simple sheath with delicate beading that highlighted her slender frame, I saw Victoria physically bite her tongue to stop herself from commenting immediately. She watched carefully as Jessica evaluated herself in the mirror, her expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. "What do you think?" Jessica asked, turning to face us both. "What matters is what you think," Victoria replied before I could speak. "How does it make you feel?" Jessica blinked, clearly surprised by the question. "It's nice, but I'm not sure it's me." Victoria nodded encouragingly. "Then let's try something else. There's no rush." Over the next 2 hours, Jessica tried on at least 15 dresses, ranging from traditional to avant-garde. With each selection, Victoria grew more relaxed, offering observations rather than pronouncements, asking questions instead of dictating choices. When Jessica finally emerged in a vintage-inspired A-line with subtle lace detailing and a T-length hem, her face glowed with certainty before she'd even reached the mirror. "This one," she said, twirling to see the dress from all angles. "This feels like me." Tears pricked my eyes as I nodded in agreement. The dress was perfect, elegant but not pretentious, distinctive without being trendy, romantic without drowning, her in excess fabric. Victoria rose from her chair and circled Jessica slowly, professional assessment in her gaze. "The silhouette suits you beautifully," she said finally. "And the shorter length will showcase those blue Manolo Blahniks you loved." "You remembered those shoes?" Jessica asked, surprised. "Of course," Victoria replied. "Just because I was pushing the Bradford ball gown doesn't mean I wasn't paying attention to what actually made you smile." She touched the lace detail on the bodice. "This is exquisite craftsmanship. Quality that will stand the test of time without overwhelming your natural grace." Coming from Victoria, this was the highest possible endorsement. Jessica beamed, clearly touched by her future mother-in-law's genuine approval. "So we're decided?" Sophia asked, smiling at our unanimous nods. "We are," Jessica confirmed, radiating happiness as she gazed at her reflection. "This is definitely the one." As Sophia helped Jessica change back into her regular clothes, Victoria turned to me with an expression that hovered between embarrassment and determination. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for giving me another chance, for not excluding me the way I tried to exclude you." "We both want the same thing," I replied simply, "Jessica's happiness." Victoria nodded, a new respect in her eyes. "You've raised an extraordinary daughter, Eleanor. Strong-minded, compassionate, authentic. Those aren't qualities I've always valued in the Bradford circle, but I'm beginning to see their worth." From Victoria Bradford, this was practically a declaration of devotion. I accepted it with a gracious nod, recognizing the effort it cost her to acknowledge my parenting success. When Jessica rejoined us, glowing with the satisfaction of having found her perfect dress, Victoria surprised us both by suggesting lunch at a small cafe nearby, nowhere near the caliber of establishment she typically frequented, but cozy and welcoming. Over sandwiches and iced tea, the three of us began tentatively mapping out the next steps in the wedding planning process. Victoria offered her connections with top floral designers, while I suggested incorporating my father's favorite roses from the Grand's gardens. Jessica listened to us both, smiling at our efforts to collaborate rather than compete. By the time we parted ways that afternoon, something fundamental had shifted. We weren't friends. Victoria and I were too different in our backgrounds, values, and approaches to ever be close companions. But we had found common ground in our love for Jessica and our desire to create a wedding that truly reflected her relationship with Connor. As Jessica and I walked to our cars, she linked her arm through mine and leaned her head against my shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly, "for fighting for me, even when I was too confused to fight for myself." I kissed the top of her head, my heart full. Always. "You know what I'm thinking?" Jessica said, her voice brightening with sudden inspiration. "We could incorporate Grandpa Ray's roses into the wedding somehow," Jessica said, her eyes alight with excitement. "Not just as decorations, but something more meaningful. What if we asked the Grand's gardeners to create a special bouquet using the varieties he planted? Or maybe we could give rose seedlings as wedding favors." I smiled, touched by her desire to honor my father's legacy. He would have loved that. He always said flowers were meant to be shared, not just admired. Jessica squeezed my hand. "It's settled then. I'll talk to Diana about coordinating with the gardening staff." She paused, her expression growing thoughtful. "You know, this whole experience has made me realize something important." "What's that?" I asked as we reached my car. "I've been so focused on becoming a Bradford that I almost forgot who I already am, a Mitchell. Your daughter, Grandpa Ray's granddaughter." She looked at me with clear eyes. "I don't want to lose that part of myself when I marry Connor." "You won't," I assured her. "The best marriages add to who you are, not subtract from it." Jessica nodded, seeming to absorb this wisdom. "That's why the Grand is the right venue. It represents both where I'm coming from and where I'm going. A place with history that still has room for new beginnings." As I drove home that afternoon, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced since before Jessica's engagement. The wedding planning was back on track, not just logistically, but emotionally. My daughter was reclaiming her voice. Victoria was learning to listen rather than command, and I was finding my proper place in the process. Not sidelined, but not controlling either. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of collaborative planning. True to her word, Victoria used her formidable organizational skills and social connections to smooth the transition from Westfield Manor to the Grand. She negotiated with vendors, reworked contracts, and managed to transfer most deposits without significant penalties. Whatever her faults, Victoria Bradford was undeniably effective when properly motivated. I focused on the personal touches, working with the Grand's pastry chef to recreate Jessica's favorite childhood birthday cake as one tier of the wedding cake, coordinating with Diana to ensure my father's favorite spots in the garden were highlighted in the ceremony layout, and helping Jessica select music that meant something to her and Connor, rather than adhering to Victoria's classical-only mandate. Even Connor seemed relieved by the new dynamic, confiding in me one afternoon when he stopped by to pick up Jessica. "I've never seen my mother compromise like this before. Usually, it's her way or no way at all." "People can surprise you when given the chance," I replied, thinking of my own evolving relationship with Victoria. "She respects you," Connor said with surprising insight. "After your showdown over the venue, She realized you weren't going to be steamrolled like most people in her life. I think she secretly admires that. I laughed at the notion. Admiration. Might be a stretch, but we've reached an understanding. Connor shook his head. Trust me, in Bradford terms, that is admiration. My mother doesn't understand people. She categorizes them as either useful or irrelevant. You've earned a third category, formidable ally. His words gave me a new perspective on Victoria's behavioral shift. Perhaps it wasn't just public embarrassment that had prompted her change of approach, but genuine respect for a worthy opponent. The thought was oddly comforting. 1 month before the wedding, Diana Chen suggested we conduct a formal walkthrough at the Grand, with all key vendors present. It helps everyone visualize the flow of the day, she explained, and it gives us time to address any logistical issues before they become problems. Victoria immediately took charge of coordinating schedules, ensuring that everyone from the florist to the lighting technician would be available. I focused on making sure Jessica and Connor's preferences were properly communicated to each vendor, creating detailed notes about their priorities and non-negotiables. On the morning of the walkthrough, I arrived early to find Victoria already there, dressed impeccably as always, but with a notepad and practical flat shoes rather than her usual heels, a concession to the amount of walking we'd be doing throughout. The venue. Eleanor, she greeted me with a brief nod. I've taken the liberty of creating vendor information packets. She handed me a slim folder embossed with Jessica and Connor's names. Please review the timeline and let me know if you see any issues. I skimmed the meticulously organized schedule, impressed despite myself. Victoria had allocated appropriate time for photography in my father's rose garden, included the string quartet Jessica wanted for the ceremony, rather than the full orchestra. Victoria had initially insisted upon, and even noted that the cake cutting should feature the song from Jessica's favorite movie rather than traditional wedding music. This looks very thoughtful, I said, genuinely surprised by her attention to the details that mattered to Jessica and Connor. You've incorporated all their requests. Victoria straightened her already perfect posture. That is the point of this exercise, isn't it? Their wedding, their preferences. Before I could respond, Jessica and Connor arrived, followed by a parade of vendors, the florist with sample arrangements, the caterer with menu cards, the photographer discussing optimal timing for garden shots based on the sun's position. Diana Chen orchestrated the group with professional efficiency, guiding us through each space while the vendors made notes and asked questions. As we walked through the grand ballroom, discussing table arrangements and dance floor dimensions, I noticed Jessica grow quiet, her eyes fixed on the central chandelier. Everything okay? I asked softly, touching her arm. Better than okay, she replied with a smile. I was just imagining Dad standing right there, proposing to you. Grandpa Ray hiding behind that column, watching it all happen. It makes everything feel so connected. Victoria, overhearing this exchange, paused in her conversation with the lighting designer. These historical connections are precisely what make the Grand special, she said, surprising me with her sincerity. Westfield Manor has Bradford history, yes, but this place has Mitchell history. Your history, Jessica. That's far more meaningful. For your wedding day. Jessica looked at Victoria with genuine appreciation. Thank you for understanding that. Victoria nodded, then turned back to the lighting designer with renewed focus. Now, about those uplights along the back wall. We need a warm amber, not that harsh golden yellow you're proposing. The walkthrough continued for nearly 4 hours, with each vendor presenting options, Jessica and Connor making decisions, and Victoria and I offering support rather than direction. By the time we gathered for a late lunch in the Grand's restaurant, most of the major logistical questions had been resolved, and the wedding was taking clear shape, not as a Bradford Society event or a recreation of my own modest wedding, but as something uniquely Jessica and Connor's. Over coffee and dessert, Victoria surprised me by raising her cup in a small toast. "To effective collaboration," she said, with the ghost of a smile. "I must admit, Eleanor, your insight into Jessica's preferences has been invaluable. This wedding will be more authentic because of your involvement." Coming from Victoria Bradford, this was high praise indeed. I returned the gesture with my own cup. "And your organizational skills have saved us from what could have been logistical disasters. We make a surprisingly effective team." Victoria's smile widened fractionally. "Indeed. Perhaps there's a lesson here about combining different strengths, rather than competing over who gets to be in control." Jessica and Connor exchanged amused glances at this philosophical breakthrough from Victoria. Connor raised his water glass. "To both our mothers," he said warmly, "for showing us that cooperation is possible even between the most unlikely allies." We all laughed. The tension that had marked the early planning stages now transformed into something approaching camaraderie. As we prepared to leave, Diana pulled me aside. "Your father would be proud," she said quietly. "Not just of the wedding plans, but of how you've handled this situation. Raymond always said you had a quiet strength that people underestimated." Her words touched me deeply. "Thank you for saying that. And thank you for honoring his connection to this place. It means more than you know." As the weeks counted down to the wedding day, final details fell into place with surprising ease. Jessica's dress arrived and needed only minor alterations. The floral arrangements, incorporating my father's special rose varieties, were approved after a single sample viewing. Even the seating chart, typically a nightmare of family politics and social hierarchies, came together with minimal drama, thanks to Victoria's strategic diplomacy and my intimate knowledge of which relatives could not, under any circumstances, be seated near each other. 3 days before the wedding, Jessica called me sounding uncharacteristically nervous. "Mom, can you come over? There's something I need to ask you." I arrived at her apartment 20 minutes later to find her surrounded by wedding gifts and half-packed boxes. She and Connor would be moving into their new condo immediately after returning from their honeymoon. "Everything okay?" I asked, concerned by her anxious expression. Jessica took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about the ceremony, about who walks me down the aisle." My heart constricted painfully. Jessica's father had never been part of her life. He'd walked away when she was an infant and never looked back. We rarely discussed him, and I'd assumed Jessica would either walk alone or ask her Uncle Mark, my brother, to escort her. "I know Uncle Mark offered," Jessica continued, twisting her engagement ring nervously. "And that would be fine, but—" She looked up at me, her eyes suddenly determined. "It should be you, Mom. You're the one who's been there every step of the way. You're the one who raised me, supported me, loved me unconditionally. I want you to walk me down the aisle." Tears sprang to my eyes before she'd even finished speaking. "Oh, Jess. Is that weird?" she asked anxiously. "Victoria mentioned it's not traditional, but she actually said she thought it was appropriate, given our history." I blinked in surprise. "Victoria said that?" Jessica nodded. "She said traditions should serve people, not the other way around. That walking down the aisle is about being escorted by someone who loves you deeply, who has helped shape who you are. She said that's obviously you in my case." I sat down heavily on the nearest chair, genuinely moved by Victoria Bradford's unexpected support. "She's right," I managed through my emotion. "And yes, Jessica, I would be honored, beyond honored, to walk you down the aisle." Jessica threw her arms around me, and we held each other tightly, both of us crying now. "Thank you for everything, Mom," she whispered. "For fighting for me, for loving me, for showing me what real strength looks like." The day before the wedding, final preparations kicked into high gear. The rehearsal went smoothly, with Diana Chen guiding the wedding party through their positions and timing. Victoria oversaw the rehearsal dinner at an exclusive restaurant near the Grand. Her territory once again, but she'd been careful to incorporate elements Jessica and Connor had requested, including a slideshow of childhood photos I'd helped compile. As dinner concluded, Edward Bradford stood to offer the traditional father of the groom toast. Victoria, seated beside him, looked uncharacteristically emotional as her husband spoke of family connections, new beginnings, and the blending of two distinct family cultures. "The Bradfords have done things a certain way for generations," Edward acknowledged, glancing at his wife with affection. "Sometimes perhaps to a fault. But Jessica has brought a fresh perspective into our family, a reminder that traditions are meant to evolve, not constrain." He raised his glass. "To Jessica and Connor. May they create their own traditions while honoring the best of both their families." After dinner, Victoria approached me as guests mingled over coffee and dessert. "A moment, Eleanor?" she asked, gesturing toward a quiet corner of the restaurant. I followed, curious about what final wedding details might need discussion. At this late stage, Victoria reached into her handbag and withdrew a small velvet box. "I wanted to give you this privately," she said, handing it to me with uncharacteristic hesitation. "It's a small token of appreciation for your grace during this process." I opened the box to find a delicate silver bracelet set with small, blue stones that matched the color scheme Jessica had chosen for the wedding. "It's beautiful," I said, genuinely touched by the gesture, "but not necessary." "Perhaps not necessary," Victoria agreed, "but deserved. I behaved abominably at the beginning of this planning process, Eleanor. My need to control everything nearly cost Jessica the wedding she actually wanted, and nearly deprived you of the role you deserved in creating it." I studied Victoria's face, seeing real regret there. "We both had to adjust our expectations," I said diplomatically. "Yes, but my adjustments were long overdue." Victoria's perfect posture softened slightly. "My sister Cynthia says I've been compensating for my own disappointing wedding for decades, projecting onto each family bride the perfect Bradford wedding I thought I wanted, but never quite achieved." This personal revelation from the normally reserved Victoria surprised me. "Was your wedding not what you wanted?" A flicker of old pain crossed her face. "It was exactly what my mother-in-law wanted, which wasn't at all what I had dreamed of, but in those days, Bradford traditions weren't questioned." She smiled ruefully. "I've spent 30 years ensuring every Bradford wedding met the standard, without ever asking if the standard itself made sense." "Until Jessica," I observed. "Until Jessica," Victoria agreed. "And until you stood your ground about the Grand." It was illuminating to be on the receiving end of the very treatment I'd given to you. She gestured toward the bracelet. "Hence, a peace offering, and my sincere thanks for helping me see beyond my own rigidity." I slipped the bracelet onto my wrist, strangely moved by this glimpse of Victoria's vulnerability. "It seems we've both learned something from this experience." "Indeed." Victoria straightened, her moment of openness passing. "Now, about tomorrow's timeline. The hairstylists are arriving at 9, which should give us ample time before the noon ceremony. I've arranged for a light breakfast to be served in the bridal suite." And just like that, she was back to her efficient, organizing self, but with a new awareness of boundaries that hadn't existed before. I listened to her plans, offering input where appropriate and marveling at how far we'd come from our initial power struggle. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and perfect, as if even the weather was cooperating with our carefully laid plans. I arrived at the Grand Hotel at 8:30, carrying Jessica's dress in its protective bag and a small case containing my father's pocket watch, which would be pinned inside Jessica's bouquet as her something old. The bridal suite was a flurry of activity, hairstylists setting up their equipment, makeup artists arranging their palettes, Jessica's bridesmaids already in matching robes, sipping mimosas and taking selfies. Victoria arrived moments after I did, carrying elegant gift bags for each bridesmaid and a special envelope for Jessica. "You're something blue," she explained, handing the envelope to my daughter. "I hope it's acceptable." Jessica opened it to find a vintage sapphire hairpin. "Victoria, it's stunning." "It was my grandmother's," Victoria said with uncharacteristic shyness. "She wore it at her wedding in 1927, right here at the Grand, actually. I thought it might complement your Mitchell family connections to this place." Jessica embraced her future mother-in-law with genuine affection. "It's perfect. Thank you." Victoria blinked rapidly, clearly fighting unexpected emotion. "Well," she said briskly, recovering her composure, "let's get you ready to become a Bradford, shall we?" The next few hours passed in a blur of preparations. Jessica's hair styled in loose waves adorned with Victoria's sapphire pin, her makeup enhancing rather than masking her natural beauty, bridesmaids being laced into their dresses, photographers capturing every moment. Victoria and I moved in coordinated efficiency, each handling different aspects of the preparation without stepping on each other's toes. At 11:30, with the ceremony fast approaching, Victoria discreetly left to check on Connor and the groomsmen, while I helped Jessica into her dress. As I fastened the delicate buttons down her back, I was struck by a wave of memory. This grown woman before me had once been a tiny girl spinning in princess dresses, begging me to do the buttons, Mommy. "You look absolutely beautiful," I said, my voice catching as Jessica turned to face me in her completed bridal ensemble. "Do you think Grandpa Ray would have approved?" she asked softly. "He would have been so proud," I assured her, adjusting her veil. "Not just of how you look, but of who you are. Strong enough to stand up for what you want, wise enough to compromise when it matters, kind enough to bring people together even when they start at odds." Jessica hugged me carefully, mindful of her dress and makeup. "I learned all that from you, Mom." A knock at the door interrupted our emotional moment. Diana Chen peeked in, looking elegantly professional in a tailored suit. "It's time," she said with a warm smile. "The guests are seated, the music has started, and a very nervous groom is waiting at the altar." Jessica took a deep breath, suddenly serious. "This is really happening." "It really is," I confirmed, offering my arm as we had practiced. "Ready to walk down the aisle with your old mom?" She smiled, slipping her arm through mine. "I can't imagine doing it with anyone else." We made our way to the garden where the ceremony would take place. The setting was breathtaking, rows of white chairs arranged beneath flowering trees, an aisle carpeted with petals from my father's roses, and at the end, a simple arch entwined with greenery and white blooms. Through the gap in the seating, I could see Connor standing at the altar, looking handsome and terrified in equal measure, with his best man nervously shifting beside him. The string quartet began playing the piece Jessica had selected, not the traditional wedding march, but a gentle melody that had been my father's favorite. As we prepared to step onto the petal-strewn aisle, Victoria appeared at my side, impeccable, in a pale blue dress that complemented rather than competed with my own outfit. "Everything is perfect," she whispered, straightening Jessica's veil one last time. "Absolutely perfect." Then, to my surprise, she squeezed my arm briefly. "Well done, Eleanor." To both of us, actually. Before I could respond, the music shifted, signaling our cue. With Jessica's arm securely linked through mine, we began the walk down the aisle, passing guests who smiled and sometimes wiped away tears, moving steadily toward Connor, whose face transformed with love and wonder as he caught sight of his bride. In that moment, all the planning conflicts, all the power struggles, all the compromises and frustrations of the past months faded into insignificance. What mattered was Jessica's happiness, radiating from her like sunlight. Connor's devotion, visible in every line of his body as he watched her approach, and the beautiful celebration we had created together. Not a Bradford spectacle, not a Mitchell family reunion, but a genuine expression of two people joining their lives in a place that honored both their pasts and their future. As we reached the altar and I prepared to give Jessica's hand to Connor, I caught Victoria's eye in the front row. She nodded slightly, a gesture of mutual respect and shared accomplishment. We had both gotten what we truly wanted, not control over the wedding itself, but the joy of contributing meaningfully to a day that would remain in our family memories forever. The celebrant's voice rang out clear and warm. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" I smiled at Jessica, at Connor, and finally at Victoria, before answering with perfect confidence. "Her mother does, with love and blessing." As I took my seat in the front row, Victoria discreetly passed me a tissue for the tears I hadn't realized were falling. The ceremony proceeded beautifully, Jessica and Connor exchanging heartfelt vows they had written themselves, the exchange of rings, the celebrant's words of wisdom about marriage as a partnership of equals rather than a merging of identities. When Jessica and Connor were pronounced husband and wife, the guests erupted in applause, and I found myself joining hands with Victoria in a spontaneous gesture of shared joy. As the newlyweds processed back down the aisle, showered with rose petals and beaming with happiness, Victoria leaned toward me. "I believe we've managed to create something rather extraordinary here," she said, her usual imperial tone softened, with genuine emotion. "Yes," I agreed, watching Jessica's radiant face as she and Connor paused to embrace Edward at the end of the aisle. "I believe we have." The reception that followed was everything Jessica and Connor had envisioned. Elegant, without being stuffy, personal without being casual, a perfect balance of Bradford sophistication and Mitchell warmth. The Grand's ballroom glowed with amber lighting that made the crystal chandeliers sparkle like stars, just as my father had once created for my own engagement years ago. Jessica and Connor's first dance was to the song that had been playing when they met. Not a classic ballroom selection Victoria would have chosen, but a contemporary piece that had them laughing and whispering to each other as they moved across the floor. When Edward led Victoria onto the dance floor for the parents' dance, I felt a momentary pang of being the odd one out, until Connor approached me with an extended hand. "May I have this dance?" he asked formally, but with genuine warmth. "Since I now have two mothers, it seems only right that I dance with both of them." Touched by his thoughtfulness, I accepted his hand and joined him on the dance floor, where Victoria graciously shared the spotlight that would traditionally have been hers alone. As we danced, Connor thanked me not just for raising Jessica to be the woman he loved, but for fighting for the wedding that truly reflected their relationship. "Victoria would have steamrolled us completely if you hadn't stood your ground about the Grand," he admitted with a rueful smile. "You gave Jessica permission to speak up about what she really wanted, not just what she thought would please the Bradford side of the family." "Sometimes we all need a reminder that it's okay to advocate for ourselves," I replied, thinking of my own journey through this process. As the evening progressed, I found myself observing the results of our collaborative planning with deep satisfaction. Bradford cousins were chatting comfortably with my hospital colleagues at mixed tables Victoria and I had carefully arranged. Jessica's childhood friends were teaching Connor's business associates how to do the electric slide. The cake, a perfect compromise between Bradford elegance and Mitchell flavor preferences, was being served to universal acclaim. Near midnight, as the celebration showed no signs of winding down, I stepped out onto the terrace for a moment of quiet reflection. The garden below was illuminated with thousands of tiny lights, transforming my father's beloved rose beds into something magical and dreamlike. "Quite a view, isn't it?" Victoria's voice came from behind me. She joined me at the balustrade, two champagne flutes in hand. She offered one to me. "A toast seems appropriate." I accepted the glass with a smile. "What shall we drink to?" Victoria considered for a moment, uncharacteristically thoughtful. To unexpected alliances, she suggested finally, and to the wedding neither of us initially envisioned, but both of us helped create. To unexpected alliances, I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. We sipped in companionable silence, watching the party continue through the ballroom's windows. Jessica and Connor were surrounded by friends on the dance floor, laughing as they attempted some complicated group dance. She looks happy, Victoria observed softly. Truly happy. Not just bride on her wedding day happy, but deeply content with the choices she's made. Yes, I agreed. They both do. Victoria turned to face me directly. I owe you an apology. Eleanor, a real one, not just the diplomatic concessions I've been making throughout this process. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by her candor. You've already apologized. Several times, actually. For the wrong things, Victoria said with unexpected humility. I apologized for being controlling about the wedding details, for overshadowing your role as mother of the bride. But I never properly acknowledged the deeper offense. Which was? I judged you, Victoria said simply. From the moment Jessica brought Connor home and mentioned her mother was a hospital nurse from a modest background, I made assumptions about your taste, your capabilities, your value. I decided you couldn't possibly understand what a Bradford wedding should be, so I excluded you entirely rather than risking your input. The honesty of her self-assessment was startling. That's remarkably self-aware, Victoria. She smiled faintly. My sister Cynthia has been rather relentless in her feedback about my character flaws since our confrontation at the club. It's been uncomfortable, but illuminating. She looked out at the garden again. The irony, of course, is that your vision for this wedding, centered on the grand, incorporating family history and personal meaning, was ultimately far more elegant and significant than my standardized Bradford production would have been. I considered her words carefully. I think the final result is better than either of us would have created alone. Your attention to detail and social graces, my focus on personal significance. Together, they created something neither of us could have achieved separately. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps that's the lesson here, not just for wedding planning, but for family relationships going forward. She gestured toward the ballroom where Jessica and Connor were now gathered with friends for photographs. Those two are going to need both of us in their lives, your emotional wisdom and my practical pragmatism. Are you suggesting we continue our unexpected alliance beyond tonight? I asked, amused by the concept. I'm suggesting we've proven we can work together effectively when motivated by common purpose, Victoria replied with diplomatic precision. She hesitated, then added more personally, and that perhaps I've gained a certain respect for your approach to life that I didn't anticipate. From Victoria Bradford, this was practically a declaration of friendship. I raised my glass, again. To continued effective collaboration, then, for Jessica and Connor's sake. Victoria clinked her glass against mine. For their sake, she agreed, and perhaps occasionally for our own. As we rejoined the reception, I caught Jessica's eye across the ballroom. She took in the sight of Victoria and me returning together from the terrace, champagne glasses in hand, and her face lit up with a smile of pure delight. She nudged Connor, who followed her gaze and gave us a surprised but pleased thumbs up. In that moment, I realized that perhaps the greatest gift we had given Jessica and Connor wasn't the grand hotel with its crystal chandeliers and historic gardens, or the perfectly coordinated color scheme, or even the meaningful family touches woven throughout the day. It was the example of two strong-willed women learning to respect each other's strengths, to compromise without surrendering identity, to transform competition into collaboration. Their married life would undoubtedly face challenges that would require exactly these skills. By modeling this unexpected alliance, Victoria and I had provided them with something far more valuable than the perfect wedding day, a template for navigating the complex family dynamics that lay ahead. As the last guests departed and the cleanup crew began discreetly transforming the ballroom back to its original state, Jessica and Connor found me by the grand staircase, both still glowing with happiness despite the late hour. "Mom, we can't thank you enough," Jessica said, embracing me tightly. "Everything was absolutely perfect." "More than perfect," Connor agreed, his arm around Jessica's waist. "The grand was the right choice, it felt like. Like us, somehow." I smiled, emotions still running close to the surface after such a momentous day. "I'm just happy you're happy." "We have something for you," Jessica said, exchanging a meaningful look with her new husband. "A thank you gift that doesn't begin to cover everything you've done." Connor produced a small envelope from his jacket pocket and handed it to me. "We wanted to give this to you privately, before we leave for the honeymoon." Inside was a reservation, confirmation for the Grand Hotel's famous presidential suite, for the coming weekend, with the full spa package included. "After all the wedding stress, we thought you deserved some pampering," Jessica explained. "This is incredibly generous," I said, genuinely moved. "But your wedding was gift enough. Seeing you both so happy." "Mom," Jessica interrupted gently, "just say thank you and enjoy it. You've earned this. More than earned it." I hugged them both, overwhelmed with gratitude and pride. "Thank you. I'll treasure this." As they prepared to leave, Jessica asked, "Will you be okay getting home tonight? It's so late." "Actually," I replied with a small smile, "Victoria suggested I stay at the Grand tonight. She arranged a room for me, and for herself as well, said it made more sense than driving home at this hour." Jessica's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Victoria suggested you stay? And she's staying too?" "I know," I laughed softly. "Unexpected alliance indeed." After one final round of hugs, Jessica and Connor departed for their bridal suite, leaving me alone in the grand foyer. Victoria appeared a moment later, her perfect posture showing no signs of fatigue despite the long day. "They've gone up?" she asked, gesturing toward the newlyweds' retreating figures. I nodded. "Just now. They seem very happy." "As they should be," Victoria replied with satisfaction. "The wedding was an unqualified success." She glanced at the envelope in my hand. "Ah, they gave you your gift? You knew about this?" asked, surprised by her involvement. Victoria's lips curved in a small smile. "It may have been my suggestion. The presidential suite seemed appropriate for the mother of the bride who secured the Grand in the first place." She consulted her watch. "Your room should be ready. 7th floor, garden view. I took the liberty of having your overnight bag delivered there earlier." The realization that Victoria Bradford had not only thought of my comfort, but had actually planned for it, left me momentarily speechless. That was very considerate, Victoria. "Practical," she corrected, but without her usual sharpness. "It's nearly 2 in the morning. The last thing any of us needs is to be driving home exhausted." As we rode up in comfortable silence, I reflected on how dramatically our relationship had evolved over the course of planning this wedding. From open hostility to grudging cooperation to something approaching mutual respect, it was a transformation. I couldn't have imagined when Victoria had first suggested I work as a floor scrubber in a retirement home. The next morning dawned clear and beautiful. I dressed carefully in the casual outfit I'd packed and made my way down to the garden room at precisely 9 o'clock, where Victoria was already seated at a table overlooking the rose garden. "Good morning, Eleanor," she said, setting aside her tablet as I approached. "I hope you slept well?" "Wonderfully," I replied, taking the seat across from her. "The beds here are heavenly." Victoria nodded in agreement. The Grand has always excelled at comfort without sacrificing elegance. Coffee? I accepted the cup she poured, adding cream and sugar while Victoria sipped hers black. I took the liberty of ordering for us, she explained. The Grand's breakfast soufflé is not to be missed, and their house-made pastries are exceptional. That sounds perfect, I said sincerely. Thank you. As our breakfast arrived, delicate soufflés, accompanied by perfectly flaky croissants and seasonal berries, Victoria surprised me with an unexpected proposal. The Bradford Foundation has been looking to expand its healthcare initiatives, she said, stirring her coffee. Given your experience in hospital administration, I wondered if you might be interested in joining our advisory committee. It would give Jessica a way to bridge her two worlds, seeing her mother involved in Bradford philanthropic efforts while utilizing your professional expertise. I nearly choked on my soufflé. You want me to join a Bradford committee? Is that so? Surprising? Victoria asked with a raised eyebrow. You've demonstrated considerable strategic thinking and resilience during this wedding planning process. Those qualities would be valuable to our healthcare initiatives. I'm flattered, I said honestly, but I don't have experience with high-level philanthropy. You have expertise in healthcare operations and patient needs, Victoria countered. That's precisely what our committee lacks. Someone who understands the practical realities beyond the financial abstractions. She added with surprising candor. Besides, I've found our collaboration unexpectedly effective. I see no reason why it shouldn't continue in other contexts. Victoria Bradford was actually proposing we continue working together, voluntarily, after the wedding was over. It was perhaps the most astonishing development in a season full of surprises. I'll consider it, I said carefully. It would depend on the time commitment and how it fits with my hospital responsibilities. Of course, Victoria nodded. The committee meets quarterly, with some email correspondence between meetings. Nothing too onerous. She reached into her handbag and produced a slim folder. Here's some information about the Foundation's current healthcare initiatives. Review it at your leisure. As I accepted the folder, I was struck again by Victoria's thoroughness. She'd clearly been planning this invitation before knowing how the wedding would unfold, or how our relationship would evolve. The weekend at the Grand arrived quickly, the days between filled with returning to my regular hospital routine and helping coordinate the first wave of thank you notes for wedding gifts. The presidential suite exceeded even my elevated expectations. Spacious. Living area with antique furnishings, a canopied king-sized bed, marble bathroom, and most impressively, a private wraparound terrace overlooking both the formal gardens and the distant mountains. Diana Chen personally escorted me to the suite, pointing out special features and explaining the butler service available. Raymond would be so proud, she said quietly as we stood on the terrace, to see his daughter enjoying the presidential suite after all his years of service to the Grand. The mention of my father brought unexpected tears to my eyes. He never got to stay here himself, did he? Diana shook her head. No, though Mr. Harrington offered several times. Raymond always said he preferred tending the gardens to being waited on. She smiled softly. But he would have loved knowing you were experiencing this. It would have felt like completion of a circle to him. The next day brought promised spa treatments and deep relaxation. By evening, as I prepared for dinner with Victoria and Edward, I felt more refreshed than I had in years. I dressed carefully, in my best cocktail dress. Nothing that would compete with Victoria's designer wardrobe, but flattering and appropriate for an upscale restaurant. The chef's table was set in a glass-enclosed alcove that offered both privacy and a full view of the culinary team at work. Victoria and Edward rose as I entered, both impeccably dressed as expected. Eleanor? Victoria greeted me with what appeared to be genuine pleasure. I trust you're enjoying the presidential suite. It's absolutely magnificent, I replied honestly. The terrace alone is worth the stay. Edward stepped forward with warm cordiality. Eleanor, wonderful to see you again. The wedding was spectacular, and Victoria created something truly special. Thank you, I said, surprised by his generous inclusion of me alongside Victoria. Throughout the elaborate meal, 7 exquisite courses with paired wines, I found myself increasingly at ease with the Bradfords. Edward was more personable than I'd previously given him credit for, with a dry wit that occasionally surfaced. Victoria, while still characteristically precise, showed flashes of genuine warmth and even self-deprecating humor about her control-oriented tendencies. As dessert arrived, Edward raised his glass in a toast. To successful collaborations, he said, glancing between his wife and me, and to the unexpected friendships they sometimes produce. Victoria's eyebrow lifted slightly at the word friendship, but she didn't correct her husband, merely raising her glass in acknowledgement. After dinner, Victoria suggested we continue our conversation on my terrace. The gardens below were illuminated with thousands of tiny lights, creating a magical landscape beneath the star-filled sky. It's breathtaking, I said softly, leaning against the stone balustrade. Victoria nodded, her usual precision momentarily softened. I stayed in this suite once, years ago, she said unexpectedly. When Edward and I were first married, his father arranged it as a wedding gift. That must have been wonderful, I replied, surprised by this personal disclosure. Victoria's lips curved in a small smile. It was my first experience of true luxury. I came from money, but not Bradford money. The difference was educational. For the first time, I realized that Victoria might understand the sensation of being an outsider better than I'd assumed. Was it difficult? I asked carefully. Becoming a Bradford? Victoria considered the question with uncharacteristic openness. More difficult than I anticipated. The Bradford name comes with expectations I wasn't fully prepared for. She glanced at me. That's why I've been so protective of Bradford traditions. They were my roadmap when I had no other guidance. This glimpse into Victoria's experience cast her earlier behavior in a new light. Perhaps her controlling approach to Jessica's wedding hadn't been merely about maintaining Bradford standards, but about providing the structure she herself had once needed. I think Jessica and Connor will forge their own path, I said gently, with elements of both our families' traditions. Yes, Victoria agreed with unexpected conviction, and they'll be stronger for it. Jessica brings qualities to the Bradford family that we've lacked: warmth, authenticity, a certain groundedness. She turned to face me directly. Qualities she clearly inherited from you, Eleanor. Coming from Victoria Bradford, this was high praise indeed. I accepted it with a simple nod, sensing that too much acknowledgement would make us both uncomfortable with this newfound vulnerability. When the Bradfords finally departed, Victoria paused at the door. The Foundation Committee meets next month, she said. The invitation remains open, should you decide to join us. I'll let you know my decision next week, I replied. But I'm leaning towards yes. Something like satisfaction flickered across Victoria's perfectly composed features. Excellent. We'll speak soon then. She extended her hand formally. Thank you for a pleasant evening, Eleanor. Thank you for the invitation, I replied. It was unexpectedly enjoyable. The ghost of a smile touched her lips. Yes, she agreed. Quite unexpectedly so. After they left, I returned to the terrace, watching the garden lights below and reflecting on the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. What had begun as a battle over a wedding venue had transformed into something far more significant. A reclamation of my relationship with Jessica, a newfound respect from the Bradford family, and perhaps most surprisingly, the beginnings of an unexpected alliance with a woman I'd once considered my natural adversary. I raised my wine glass to the star-filled sky in a private toast to my father, whose connection to the grand had made all of this possible. "You always said gardens bring people together," I murmured. I never quite understood what you meant until now. As if in response, a gentle breeze rustled through the garden below, carrying the sweet scent of my father's roses up to where I stood. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of completion, as if all the disparate threads of the past months had woven themselves into a pattern more beautiful and complex than I could have designed alone. The venue I had secretly reserved hadn't just given Jessica the wedding location of her dreams. It had created a bridge between two families, two worldviews, two approaches to life that might otherwise never have found common ground. In fighting for my place in my daughter's wedding, I had ultimately helped create something far more valuable than a perfect celebration. A foundation for family connections that would endure long after the final thank you note had been sent. Sometimes, the most powerful act isn't grand defiance or dramatic confrontation, but simply standing firm in your own worth and waiting for the world to readjust its expectations accordingly. The wedding venue I had secretly reserved hadn't just been a location for a celebration. It had become the catalyst for a transformation that none of us, least of all Victoria Bradford, could have predicted. And in that unexpected outcome lay the true gift, the reminder that even the most firmly established patterns could be rewritten when someone was brave enough to challenge them. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.